Well, hello everyone. I thought I would do some ghost stories. Do. So you guys have something to listen to if you want to. Hope you enjoy. Well, if you can hear.
Listed here are not exclusive. They are a fair representation of the types of stories in existence. Chapter 1: Ghosts, Justice from Beyond. The Greenbrier Ghost. The truth will come out one way or another. No matter how hard we try, it will always reveal itself. It may take time, in some cases centuries, but in the long run, the one thing you can never hide from is the truth. In the case of the Greenbrier ghost, the world saw evidence of this. It was the paranormal that facilitated this coming out of the truth, and it was the ghost herself who managed to convict her murderer. In the Greenbrier County of West Virginia, a young girl was murdered in 1897. After her body had been examined only partially, it was assumed she had died of natural causes. It was not until her spirit appeared and revealed the truth that the case was reopened and her killer found. It is said that she visited her mother in her dreams and convinced her that she had been brutally choked to death, a fact that a proper autopsy would later confirm. The story begins in the year 1873, when Elva Zoner Heister was born in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, in the United States of America. Her early life and childhood years remain a mystery to the general public, as we know very little about who she was or what she did. However, it is public record that she got pregnant when she was barely out of her teens and was a mother out of wedlock when she was 22 years old. The fate of the child remains unknown. In 1895, she and her family met with a man who would become her husband and eventually her murderer. Edward Stribling Trout Shue was a blacksmith and had just moved to Greenbrier County himself in search of a better life. For Zona, who had been raised in the Richlands all of her life, he was a breath of fresh air that she had not encountered before. Shue, who worked at the shop of their usual blacksmith, attracted her attention almost immediately. After their initial meeting, Zona frequently returned to the shop to see him. Their romance was one of a harlequin whirlwind affair. Barely a few months had passed before they were tying the knot and saying their wedding vows in church. Zona's family, however, was not exactly pleased with their union. Her mother, in particular, was dead set against it. Mary Jane Heister had taken a total and instant dislike to the man her daughter had fallen in love with, and openly objected to their union. But there was little she could do, and in the end, Zona and her new husband began their life together in their little log house. It only took 3 months before their marriage began to fall apart. Zona did not know it then, but she had essentially signed her life away to a serial offender, as there were things about her husband that she would never come to know. On the 23rd of January in 1897, Shue sent his neighbor's young boy to check in on his wife to see if she needed anything. He was going to the market, he claimed, and he wanted to see if she wanted him to get anything for her. The neighbor's boy did as he was told, and walked into the Shue household, straight through the front door, only to find Zona's body lying at the foot of the stairs, lifeless. For a long moment the boy stood there staring at her, because he had no idea what to do or even what was happening. He was only a child after all. Who knows what kind of trauma he went through as he stumbled upon the dead body of Zona Heister. Her body was positioned in a manner that seemed unnatural. She was stretched out straight, and her legs had been pulled together. One of her arms was stretched out across her chest, while the other rested at her side, and her head was tilted. She actually looked like she was quietly sleeping. In fact, this was the first thought that went through the boy's head when he first saw her. Given that he was young and innocent, and the area was not known for rampant crime, it was hardly surprising that his first reaction was to assume that Zona was merely resting. He stepped towards her lifeless body and called her name softly. When his quiet, "Mrs. Shue," received no response, the realization sank in that something was seriously wrong. He panicked and raced out of the house, running straight to his mother, telling her all he had seen. Fearful for the worst, the woman called for the local coroner, Mr. George W. Knapp. Knapp, who also served as a doctor for the county, did not come to the Shu's house for almost an hour after he received the call. By the time he finally made it into the house, Shu himself had come back home and had carried his wife's body up the staircase and into their bedroom. He had laid her body out on their bed and dressed her up. This activity was the first suspicious detail in the case. It was considered rather strange for a man to wash and prepare a body. That was deemed to be a woman's job. Shu claimed that he had wanted to prepare his wife for her burial and dressed her in a high-necked dress with a stiff collar. He also placed a veil over her face and refused to leave her body while Knapp came closer to examine it. Knapp testified that Shu remained in the room during the entire time he was examining the corpse. He saw that Shu was terribly upset and pained at the loss of his wife. Not wanting to cause the man any more grief, he kept his examination short. He noted that there was some slight bruising around Zona's neck, but given that Shu was at the time holding her dead form close to him and sobbing over it, he did not make a big deal out of it. Shu also reacted almost violently when Knapp attempted to get a closer look. He pounced on the doctor and became extremely agitated. Knapp did not want to aggravate him any further, and not having found any other signs of foul play, he simply left the house. Knapp had also been treating Zona prior to her death. He originally listed the cause of death as an everlasting faint, but later changed it to childbirth. For close to 2 weeks before she died, she had been under treatment for what Knapp cited as female trouble, though whether she was pregnant or not is something that has never been confirmed. Perhaps she was trying to get pregnant and consulting with him for advice. For whatever the reason, Knapp, as her doctor, decided to go with childbirth as the cause of her death, and the case was closed. Her parents were informed of her passing and arrangements for her burial were made. On the 24th of January in 1897, Zona Shu was buried in the local cemetery. Currently, the place still exists, and it is known as the Soul Chapel Methodist Cemetery. Increasingly, Zona's husband reacted a little too strongly during the burial itself. He showed utter devotion to his wife and was extremely protective of her body in a manner that came across as more of a psychotic killer than a grieving husband, a truth that would not come to light until much later. He kept close vigil over her, constantly hovering by the open casket she was placed in and not allowing anyone else to come close to her, not even her parents. He would not let anyone touch her, especially when he put a pillow on the side of her head. His behavior was extremely erratic. His demeanor alternated between grieving loudly and painfully for his wife, and suddenly becoming extremely energetic and delighted. Apart from the pillow, he also placed a rolled-up sheet on the other side of her head, cushioning her neck entirely so that it would not be visible. To add to that, he also tied a long scarf around her neck. The pillow and the sheet, he claimed tearfully, would aid his wife in her final rest and make it more comfortable. The scarf was her favorite item of clothing, and it was his farewell to her, even if it did not match the burial dress she was wearing. As they moved her to the cemetery, they noticed that her head was lolling about in a strangely loose manner. Shu was generally well liked by the community and respected as a blacksmith, so he was not questioned, and all his strange behavior was chalked up to that of a grieving husband. Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heaster, on the other hand, refused to believe that he was without any blame. She was convinced that he had done something to her daughter, though she had no proof. After the burial, she took the sheet from her daughter's body and handed it to her son-in-law, who refused to take it back. Confused, she took it home with her, where she noticed a strange smell on it. Assuming that it was simply dirty or unclean, she washed it. This was when Zona's ghost made her first appearance. Physically, there was nothing wrong with the sheet, It was not as dirty as one might expect it to be, and certainly did not warrant a full wash. Mrs. Heaster washed it anyways, and when she dropped the sheet into the basin, the water turned red. One would assume that this was merely a red stain washing off. But what is interesting is that Mrs. Heaster saw the water's red color spread onto the sheet instead of the other way around. The color of the water stained into the sheet, turning it red, while the water became clear. No matter how hard Mrs. Heaster tried, she could not wash the red stain off the sheet. She was sure this was a clear indication that something was wrong and that Zona's spirit was communicating with her in a plea for help. Skeptics would probably claim some scientific explanation for the entire process, but the fact remains that Mrs. Heaster was a believer. Already having suspected her son-in-law of foul play, she knew that this was a sign from her daughter herself. She took to praying every night, hoping for another sign or a clue as to how to prove that her daughter had been murdered. She wanted justice, and she did not know how to get it. For the next 4 weeks, she prayed. Every night she would sit down and cry for her daughter to return and tell her the truth. Her faith was finally rewarded at the end of those 4 weeks when Zona appeared to her in a dream. The night was cold and the air was fraught with tension when Zona appeared to Mrs. Heaster and told her the whole truth. This is what Zona's ghost revealed. Shu was a man possessed of a cruel nature. He was prone to abusing the people closest to him and had regularly beat Zona. He often had violent fits, and that day he flew into a rage when she told him that she had not made any meat for dinner. In his anger, he had snapped her neck, thus explaining the strange angle of her head and the looseness to her neck as the corpse was transported to the cemetery. To prove that her neck was indeed broken, the ghost of her daughter turned her head around so that it was facing backward. And all Mrs. Heaster saw was a head of hair floating on top of her shoulders and body. It goes without saying that she was frightened beyond her wits and woke up screaming, hardly able to believe what she had seen. She might have been a believer and had even been praying for the exact sign that she had just received. But a sight like that is enough to send chills down the spine of anyone. She was inclined not to believe her dream, and ready to dismiss it as just another figment of the post-traumatic stress she had experienced, especially given the way the ghost's neck twisted completely around to bring her face back to the front. Over the course of the next 4 days, the dream would repeat itself. Mrs. Heaster reported that Zona appeared again and again. First, there would be a bright light that would shine behind her eyelids, and then slowly a mist would solidify into her dead daughter's sunken corpse, the room becoming utterly cold and frigid. This went on until Mrs. Heaster finally realized that she had gotten the proof she needed to fight for justice for her murdered daughter. She went to the local prosecutor, a man by the name of John Alfred Preston, to whom she tried to convince of her son-in-law's guilt. Obviously, with a ghost story as her only proof, he was hesitant to reopen the case. It is reported that she spent several hours with him in his study, arguing to convince him that her daughter did not die due to what was previously assumed. Zona was murdered and deserved justice. Whether he believed her story about her daughter's ghost or not, we do not know. But he did reopen the case, going on the belief that there was something suspicious about the whole situation. Noting that a few of the other local people had also stated that Shu was acting strangely, Preston considered that perhaps Zona's death had not been as innocent as it appeared. Preston went to interview people that had been involved with the case. The first of the witnesses to be interviewed was Dr. Knapp, who revealed that his examination of the body had been incomplete at best, and that he had not done a proper autopsy. Preston ordered for the body to be exhumed, and that an autopsy be conducted. An inquest jury was also formed to look into the death, and it was slowly turning into an investigation, not just a tragedy. This is where skeptics would have to accept the truth, because the autopsy confirmed what Mrs. Heaster had already known. Up until then, it was possible to have dismissed her dreams and the appearance of her daughter's ghost as something triggered by loss and psychosis. However, medical evidence proved that whatever she dreamed was completely right. Her daughter told her how she had been killed, and the autopsy confirmed it. Zona's body was exhumed and put under examination on the 22nd of February, 1897. The autopsy went on for close to 3 hours, and they found that her neck had indeed been snapped, just as the ghost had pointed out. The windpipe was smashed in, and she was choked to death, as the marks of fingers on her neck proved. The neck had become dislocated between the first two vertebrae. That Mrs. Heaster could have dreamed up in such detail, the details of her daughter's death are highly unlikely. Zona wanted justice for what was done to her, and she appealed to her mother to get it. Zona's husband, Shu, complained about his wife's body being exhumed. He told his friends that he knew he was going to be taken into custody, but he was confident of escaping since there was no real evidence of his guilt. As he predicted, the police arrested him once the autopsy was complete, and he was sent to the jail in Lewisburg to await his trial. It was during this time that the truth about him came to light. His name was not Edward, as he claimed, but Erasmus. He was from Augusta County, and he had been married 2 times before he met Zona. His first wife took their daughter and left him when he went to jail for stealing. She later told the police that he had been abusive during their marriage. His second wife died barely a year after they were married, with no particular reason being cited. While in jail in Lewisburg, Shu boasted that he wanted to marry 7 women. Everything pointed to him being a serial abuser and killer. He was strangely confident of getting away with his crimes, since there was very little evidence to prove his wrongdoing. The trial began in June 1897, with Mrs. Heaster as Preston's star witness. Preston, as an experienced attorney, knew that the idea of her daughter's ghost would not give her credibility. He limited his questions to the known facts, expertly avoiding the ghost sightings and focusing on the truth. The truth was that it was Zona's appearance that had instigated the entire trial in the first place, and Mrs. Heaster was a believer. Shu's lawyer attempted to discredit her during his cross-examination by trying to prove her as a liar and a cheat. Mrs. Heaster, however, knew what she had seen. She staunchly defended her belief, and despite clear badgering, she would not go retract what she said. In lawyer terms, it was the defense that had taken up the issue of the ghost. This meant that the judge could not instruct the jury to disregard the testimony, and they had to either believe or disbelieve what was said based on their own impressions. Since their impressions were formed on the truth that Zona's spirit had come back from the dead asking for justice, they could not deny Mrs. Heaster's testimony. Shu was found guilty of her murder and then sentenced to life in prison. A lynch mob formed to hang him for his crimes, but they were stopped, and he was sent to jail instead. He was sentenced to the West Virginia State Penitentiary, located in Moundsville. He lived there for 3 years before he passed away in March 1900 from an unknown illness. He was buried in the local graveyard. For the rest of her life, Mrs. Heaster never recanted the story of her daughter's ghost, as many skeptics expected her to. She received justice, so why would she continue lying? This was what skeptics advocated. However, the truth was that she had seen her daughter, and the paranormal incident had instigated the trial. Zona's ghost was never heard from again. Her mother died, having never seen Zona again after the triumphant end of the trial. Whether the ghost actually appeared to her or not, there definitely was something extraordinary happening that could not be denied. The state could not deny it either. A historical marker made of stone has been erected and set up near the cemetery that Zona is buried in. It reads, "Interred in nearby cemetery is Zona Heaster Shu. Her death in 1897 was presumed natural until her spirit appeared to her mother to describe how her husband Edward killed her. Autopsy on the exhumed body verified the apparition's account. Edward, found guilty of murder, was sentenced to the state prison. Only known case in which testimony from a ghost helped convict a murderer. Of Rainham Hall. When you retreat to a peaceful and serene country house in England, you would expect the experience to be calm and relaxing. The last thing you would expect is to come face to face with a ghost. And yet, this is precisely what the visitors to Rainham Hall experience when they go to stay at the place. The Brown Lady of Rainham Hall is quite the infamous ghost, having been sighted a number of times over the years, going so far as to have been photographed and published in a magazine. Rainham Halls is a country house in Norfolk, England. It has been and still is with the Townsend family for close to a period of 4 centuries. The hall lent its name to the 5 nearby estate villages, collectively known as the Rainhams, and was the backdrop for the infamous photo of the Brown Lady of Rainham Hall, published in the Country Life magazine in 1936. The manor is one of the most beautiful and splendid buildings in the Norfolk area. Its construction began in 1619, but it ended up being a false start, resulting in nothing but the collection of a significant amount of Ketton stone in the area until 1621. It wasn't until 1622 that the actual construction began. By the time the owner, Sir Roger Townsend, passed away in 1637, it was almost entirely finished. However, the manor remained unfurnished, as some rooms were not fitted out and would not be completed in full until much later. It was not until the second Viscount, Charles Townsend, that the manor would be vaulted into infamy. William Kent, one of Britain's most lauded and sought-after architects and designers of that era, worked for Charles Townsend to construct additions and extensions to the manor's interior. His style is notably seen in the north front of the manor, which he aligned closely with the work of the famous architect Inigo Jones. Between 1725 and 1732, Kent built the entire northern wing of the manor. He also decorated the interiors, bringing elements of his own personal style, evident in the aesthetically and architecturally pleasing carvings of the chimney pieces, in the doorways, and even the staircase that was painted to imitate niches. To this day, if you walk into Rainham Hall, you can see the architect's style and his genius in designing the entire mansion. Not only did he design a structurally sound building, but he also gave the interiors a majestic touch, which the family reinforced by putting up paintings and portraits that would in today's market go for hundreds of thousands of dollars. In fact, some of these paintings are still in the mansion today, even after the auctions that took place in the mid-1900s. For instance, in the princess's room, there is said to be a painting that was, apparently, the preliminary sketch for Van Dyck's famous Children of Charles I. These paintings also include works by other celebrated painters, such as Godfrey Kneller and Sir Joshua Reynolds. For all its splendor and wonder, the true majesty of Rainham Hall lies in its history and the legend that surrounds it. The story of the Brown Lady who haunts the hallowed halls. She is called the Brown Lady in reference to the brown brocade dress she is seen wearing. Charles Townsend was the second Viscount Townsend of Rainham Hall. He served as a leader in the House of the Lords in England and was born in the year 1674. The Brown Lady of Rainham Hall is none other than his wife, Lady Dorothy Walpole, who was the sister of Robert Walpole. Robert Walpole was a statesman who was generally accepted as being the first Prime Minister of Great Britain. While people debate about the exact dates of his term, the years between 1721 and 1742 are recognized as being under his control, and he holds the record for being the longest-serving Prime Minister in Britain's history. He is regarded to be one of the first people to have integrated the rising power of the House of Commons and the diminishing strength of the House of Lords, thus attempting to establish more equality. Robert Walpole may have been quite the gentleman, but his brother-in-law, Viscount Charles Townshend, was not. Charles was notorious for his short temper. In the meantime, Lady Dorothy, who was rumored to be the prettiest of the Walpole sisters, caught the wandering eye of Charles Townshend, who was then already married to Lady Elizabeth Pelham. He asked for her hand in marriage, and it was not long before Lady Dorothy was sent to Raynham Hall, which she would continue to haunt after her life on this earth had ended. Accounts tell us that there was a political rivalry between Walpole and Townshend, even though the two of them were neighbors in Norfolk. Their personal dissension hit terminal velocity when Walpole decided to build Houghton Hall in Norfolk as well. Townshend believed that Raynham was the crowning glory of Norfolk, and that any other mansion would only diminish and degrade its grandeur. He was not ready to admit the loss of power and control that came with another politician, one as strong as Walpole, establishing a base near his own. So, was Lady Dorothy a peace offering from Walpole's side? Was she a gift to please Townshend into accepting reality and burying the hatchet? We will never know if Walpole knew that he caused his sister to be collateral damage in his personal fight with Townshend. Neither will we know if the lady herself was interested in or even accepted his marriage. Her motivations and aspirations are lost to the pages of history. What has been speculated, however, is that she was having an affair with Lord Wharton at the time of her wedding, and perhaps even before her marriage. Lord Thomas Wharton, the first Marquis of Wharton, was a man notorious for his debauched and hedonistic lifestyle. Born in the year 1648, he was a nobleman who also served as a politician. His genuine interest, though, lay in drinking, partying, and leading a life of pleasure and self-indulgence. He had multiple lovers and was quite the hedonist. Some records indicate that he may have once broken into a church while drunk, and then gone on to sacrilegiously relieve himself against the communion table, as well as in the pulpit of the church. Whether this is true or not, we do not know, as there is little hard evidence that proves it. However, when he was publicly accused of it in the House of Lords, Wharton was speechless and could not offer a proper response, indicating that he was guilty of the crime in question. What is truly sad is that, despite all his debauchery, he was a man of great wit, charm, and intelligence. In fact, he was one of the strongest politicians in Aylesbury, and his voice was instrumental in the Ashby versus White case, which is famous in the UK for having established the right to vote and equality for all. It is little wonder, then, that Lady Dorothy, attracted to his wit, charm, and power, allegedly consented to be his lover before her marriage was fixed to Charles Townshend. And this carried on even after the wedding. It was Townshend's discovery of her illicit affair that led to her death. It was not the kind of crime of the mad, murderous rage of a jealous husband who grabs the nearest weapon he could find. It was instead a much crueler, painful death that Lady Dorothy went through. Charles Townshend abandoned her and left her locked up in the family home all by herself. She was left to die alone and discarded within the walls of Raynham Hall. Her husband did not even allow her to visit with her children. Can you imagine that? Being trapped in a mansion that serves as your prison with no one to interact with, thrown there by your husband, and abandoned by your lover. Lord Wharton certainly did not try to free her or help her in any way. Slowly, Lady Dorothy probably went mad. At that time, there was an outbreak of smallpox. When poor Lady Dorothy caught the disease, no one was there to nurse her back to health. Alone, desolate, and sick, Lady Dorothy may have gotten so weak in body and spirit that she lost all her will to live. You could say that Dorothy was already haunting Raynham Hall even before she died. Finally, in 1726, her sickness and her soul made her so weak, she eventually passed away and was buried on the grounds. Another theory proposed is that Lord Wharton's wife, the famous writer, poet, and aristocrat, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, may have been the cause of Lady Dorothy's grief. The Countess of Wharton was allegedly in a rage over her husband's affair with Dorothy, that she deceived her by inviting her to the home. She conspired with Charles Townshend, and it was at her cunning direction that Lady Dorothy was to be fatally trapped inside Raynham Hall. Whatever the real reasons were that led Lady Dorothy to this fatal end, what is sure is that it was a slow and cruel demise. No wonder the anger within her soul ensured that she would not rest. Her spirit, still looking for vengeance or even justice, still wanders the grounds waiting for release. Charles Townshend himself died in 1738. He spent his last years at Raynham, possibly being haunted by the appearance of his wife's ghost. However, that was not enough for her restless spirit to move on. She was still angry, sad, and filled with pain. The first recorded sighting of the Brown Lady happened in 1835. Colonel Loftus went to Raynham Hall to spend Christmas there. He was walking into his room late in the night when he caught sight of a figure in front of his room. It was a woman dressed in a brown brocade gown. When he tried to get a better look at her face, she vanished. The next evening, she appeared to him again, and this time Loftus made a note of her empty eye sockets and her glowing countenance. When news of this haunting came out, it was not a surprise that members of the house staff resigned from their jobs and decided to leave the cold manor permanently. More people started to tell personal stories of their own encounter with the ghost. Whether this brown lady was Lady Dorothy was something that people did not think about at that time. She was only called the Brown Lady, who appeared and terrorized unsuspecting victims. The second reported sighting is a second-hand account. Captain Frederick Marryat, a writer and a sailor, and who was a friend of author Charles Dickens, was apparently the next person to have seen her. While he did not comment on his experience, his son, Florence Marryat, gave a detailed account of his father's brush with the paranormal. By this time, the locals had seen the Brown Lady often enough that Raynham Hall was getting a reputation as a haunted mansion. Marryat wanted to find out the truth. He asked to spend a night in the room that was supposedly haunted. He believed that the haunting was merely local smugglers using Raynham Hall as their home base, and who wanted to keep people away from their goods. Florence Marryat said that his father stayed in the room that had the portrait of the apparition. It was by comparing the ghost to this portrait that people realized it was Lady Dorothy who was haunting them. It was in this room that she was most often seen, and was possibly the room in which she took her last breath. Marryat slept in that room each night with a revolver stashed beneath his pillow. For the first 2 days, there were no signs of anything paranormal. On the third night, though, 2 young men called on him for help in authenticating a gun that was arriving from London that day. As he left the room, he took his revolver, joking that it was for safety, in case we meet the Brown Lady. Dressed in nothing but a shirt and trousers, an indecent sort of attire for that era, Marryat accompanied the men down the hall. Initially, they caught a glimpse of a lamp that was coming towards them. The 2 young men with him figured that it was probably one of the mansion's ladies on her way to visit the nursery. The men moved quietly so that they would not appear in front of the woman, mainly because Marryat was dressed in what was considered to be immodest clothing and did not want to offend a noble lady. As they watched from their vantage point, Marryat was stunned to realize that she was wearing the infamous brown brocade gown, and she was none other than the Brown Lady. Pulling out his revolver, he was about to pull the trigger and demand the truth when she stopped at the door behind which he was hiding. Marryat claimed that she lifted the lamp she was carrying to highlight her sunken features, and then grinned at him in a malicious and diabolical manner. An ordinary man might have frozen in such a situation. Marryat, on the other hand, yanked his revolver hard and discharged the bullet right into her face. It passed right through her and lodged itself in the wall behind her, as the brown lady herself vanished into thin air. Marriott returned home and never again attempted to go back to Raynham Hall to seek out the brown lady. The next reported sighting of Lady Dorothy happened in 1926, which the then Lady Townsend recorded. Her son and his friend had been playing on the staircase together when they felt an unusual chill and caught sight of the ghost. It wasn't long before they realized that she was the same woman in the portrait, and they drew the conclusion that it was the brown lady, Lady Dorothy, who had been trapped within the manor and died inside its walls. The most infamous sighting of the brown lady happened in the year 1936, when she was captured on film and nationalized in Country Life magazine, catapulting her and Raynham Hall to fame. On the 19th of September 1936, Captain Hubert Provant, a photographer based in London, came to Raynham Hall with his assistant, Indre Shira. They both worked for Country Life magazine and wanted to take pictures of the manor for an article. It goes without saying that they were also intrigued by the mansion's history and ghastly legend. Their photograph was one of the first ghost pictures ever captured, and this garnered so much attention. They had just taken a picture of the hall's main staircase when Shira caught sight of the veiled form floating down the stairs. Shira pressed down on the trigger and captured the picture. But it was not until they developed the picture that they realized that they had caught the brown lady on camera. They got the photograph along with their entire story published in Country Life magazine, making them famous almost overnight. Noted paranormal investigator Harry Price came to interview them. He claimed that their story was legitimate, given that they did not even realize they were capturing a ghost on camera. The negative was verified as not having been tampered with, so it can be assumed that it is authentic. Logic dictates that when all other possibilities are eliminated, the truth is what's left, no matter how bizarre or unbelievable it is. And the fact is that the brown lady exists, and two amateur photographers captured her on film. Over the years, various people have studied the photograph and argued the truth behind it. Modern science has examined the picture time and time again, and each time results have been inconclusive. There is a claim that the image could be an accidental double exposure, or that light got inside of the camera by mistake, or even that Shira and Provand faked the photograph. Even if any of these theories were true, it only proves that the photograph is fake, and not that the brown lady herself is. Even after the picture was published, sightings of the brown lady haunting that room and the staircase continued, although they have dwindled down in number throughout the years. The late Marchioness of Taunton reported having seen her several times in the late 1960s, and many of the housekeeping staff talk about the cold drafts and lights typical of a haunting within the manor. The truth is that she still lingers in the hallowed halls, waiting for a release from her prison. Such a tragedy, trapped by her own family and left to die, her mind going insane. All this anger and hate inside her with no closure. She still roams the manor, haunted by what happened centuries ago, waiting for the day when, once and for all, she will be able to leave Raynham Hall. Jack Froze. A modern and relatively recent story, the tale of Jack Froze was first told through the personal accounts of those affected by it. This story can be one of horror, as well as joy, depending on how you would personally cope with and view the death of someone close to you. Some may find it deeply unsettling or horrifying, while others would find solace in the experience if they happen to have lost someone dear to them. Either way, everybody will agree that the freak occurrence described by Froze's friends and family is incredibly strange, to say the least. Jack Froze was, in the words of his loved ones, a kind, sensitive, and well-liked man living in Dunmore in the state of Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, he passed away at the young age of 32 in June 2011 due to heart problems, arrhythmic complications in particular. His death was very sudden and shocked those around him, leaving them all with much grief. He was survived by his mother Patty Froese, his longtime friend Tim Hart, and his cousin Jimmy McGraw, with whom he was close to as well. Jack's friends and family began to accept the loss and cope with it as best they could, moving on with their lives and coming to terms with life without him. This would have been an ordinary story of human loss, grief, and letting go of someone special, had it not been for the bizarre events that began to occur a few months after Jack's death. In November of 2011, Tim Hart and Jimmy McGraw were each stunned to receive separate emails from their deceased friend's email account. The messages were rather personal in nature and referred to some of the final conversations and situations that they found themselves in with Jack not long before his untimely death. These unique details infused the emails with a striking level of credibility and authenticity, which made it very difficult for his friends to brush them off as a big prank by someone who had hacked into Jack's account. Both Tim Hart and Jimmy McGraw also believe, as they have stated in an interview given to the BBC, that nobody could have possibly known the password for Jack's email account, and that a case of cyber hacking was very unlikely. Both Hart and McGraw discussed and showed the contents of the emails they received from the deceased in the BBC's TV interview. The message that Hart received stood out in his email inbox, not only because of the deceased sender, but also due to its eerie subject title, which concisely stated, "I'm watching." When Tim Hart first saw this message, he remembered that he turned as white as a sheet with utter disbelief. After the initial shock had faded, and after he got a grip on himself and his emotions, he opened the email and was greeted by the familiar light-hearted tone of voice in the email message, characteristic of the Jack Froese he knew and loved. This message from Jack read, "Did you hear me? I'm at your house. Clean your effing attic." This was especially shocking to Tim since it wasn't long before his friend's death that Jack commented jokingly on how Tim's attic was in desperate need of cleaning up. They shared this verbal exchange in a private setting, and Hart maintains that nobody else knew about it and would possibly even think of saying such a thing in an email message. Needless to say, he was unsure what to make of the email in the end, but he still replied to the received message, hoping to elicit some kind of response from beyond the grave. Unfortunately, no response that we know of ever came about. Similarly, the email sent to Jimmy McGraw pertained to his personal matters as well, but this time regarding issues that occurred after Jack's death on June of 2011. McGraw explains in the interview that he broke his ankle about a week before the received email in November 2011 on his way to work. In the message McGraw received, Jack asked how he was doing and told him that he knew he was going to sustain his injury and that he tried to warn him. Jack then told him that he ought to be careful, made a couple of very short personal remarks, and ended with his name as a signature. McGraw said that during the time when he was recovering following his ankle injury and accident, he saw very few people, which only included a couple of friends and a few family members. Despite the initial bewilderment brought about by the eerily personal emails from their departed friend, the people Jack left behind soon came to terms with what had happened. Of course, it remains unclear whether this bizarre correspondence was a very distasteful and cruel prank, or actual documented communication with the deceased Jack Froese from the realm beyond our own. Many people would probably be very disturbed if they received any sort of message or a perceived sign from their dead loved ones. But this wasn't the case with the folks that Jack left behind in Dunmore, Pennsylvania. Jack Froese's mother, Patty, told the interviewers that the emails delighted some people while they disturbed others. For her personally, she accepted them with an open heart and told Jack's loved ones that the messages were a gift from him and that they should accept them as such. She didn't give much thought to whether or not they were just a cruel prank. Instead, she was grateful for the mere fact that these mysterious emails got people to keep talking again about her son and kept his memory alive. Hart and McGraw were of a very similar mind on the subject as well. Hart said that he didn't really care whether he was being pranked or not, and that he wholeheartedly accepted the advice from Jack's mother. He said that he would take this mystery however he wanted to, but accepting it as a good thing in the end. McGraw had very similar feelings, and he described how hard he was hit by his cousin's sudden departure, explaining that he viewed the emails as Jack's attempts to make him feel better and move on from his death. He concluded that he liked the fact that he received the mysterious and unexplained email in the first place. Dealing with death and loss is such a personal and subjective experience that we each must go through in our own way. This story has that effect on the audience, since it can vary and be very subjective, depending on the person hearing it for the first time. It's possible that these emails were sent by someone close to the recipients who thought of a very distasteful way to pull a nasty trick on his or her friends. But then again, we don't know if they were also somehow sent by Jack Froese from beyond the grave in an effort to tease his dear loved ones for one last time, in the way that they knew he liked to do. Either way, Jack's inner circle got something good out of the whole experience and found a sort of closure in the mysterious messages, helping them to eventually move on. How would you have felt receiving such an unexplained and eerie correspondence from the realm of the unknown? Raise the Devil. The Ghosts of Taunton State Hospital. Many ghost stories are about sightings of single apparitions of spirits whose common tales begin with some gruesome or traumatic experience, resulting in a very tragic end. These souls sometimes get trapped in the locale where such vile crimes were committed. But when a place is subject to the constant visitation of more than a single spirit, then that story would be truly a horrifying haunting. Asylums have always been sites of hauntings, and for good reason. During earlier times, these places were treated as the graveyard for the mentally ill. During the pre-dawn of modern medicine and enlightened interpretations to psychology, the insane and the mentally disturbed were discarded by their families and sent to faraway institutions. The doctors at these institutions had a free hand with performing horrific experiments on these patients, all in the dubious name of science. Little wonder, then, that the ghosts of the hundreds of disturbed innocents who were tortured and killed haunt many of these old asylums. One of these many asylums, the Taunton State Hospital, located in Massachusetts, was one of the most horrific places where the devil himself was said to have walked through the halls. Opened in 1854, it was formerly called the State Lunatic Hospital in Taunton and served as the second state asylum. What is ironic is that it was built per the specifications of a doctor named Thomas Kirkbride, who advocated that all mentally ill patients must be treated with care and compassion. They could be best treated through positivity and good feelings, not by ostracizing them or fearing them as most people were inclined to do. The building of the hospital followed his designs, including a large campus for patients to wander around, with recreational rooms and comfortable bedrooms. The patients were supposed to be given sunlight, fresh air, good food, and a good space to move around in. It had bridgeways to keep the wards connected to the hospital's infirmary wing. The hospital was aesthetically beautiful and quite pleasing to the eye. The outer beauty, however, could not hide the inner ugliness that was taking place in its hallowed halls. Its history is bloody, murderous, and painful. Thousands of patients were tortured here, and a number of staff members over the years have reported stories of being victims themselves of some paranormal phenomenon. Taunton itself hosted a number of infamous people within its walls. Thomas Hubbard Sumner, the inventor of the Sumner line, was one such patient who spent his last days in this hospital. Convicted serial killer Jane Toppin was also sentenced to life here, and her story is quite a chilling tale. Taunton, who lost her mother when she was just a child, was raised by her father, who was an alcoholic and eccentric madman nicknamed Kelly the Crack. He left his two daughters at the Boston Female Asylum and vanished. Jane was then adopted as the servant of the well-to-do Taunton family, whose last name she took. As she grew up and trained to be a nurse, she started using her patients as her guinea pigs, dosing them with various drugs such as morphine and atropine. She claimed that the sight of her patients when they were close to death aroused her sexually. She would dose them, get into bed with them, and hold them close as they passed away. She later moved back to her hometown where she killed her foster sister, as well as attempted to seduce her widowed brother-in-law after the gruesome fact. With her foster sister dead, she tried to convince her sister's husband that she loved him by poisoning him, only to nurse him back to health. She also poisoned herself to gain sympathy from him. These attempts to get the attention of her brother-in-law did not work, and he sent her away from their home. Investigations of her previous murders led to her arrest, where she confessed to having killed more than 30 people. She was sentenced to life at the Taunton State Asylum. Her ghost, no doubt, still haunts the halls, drawing people closer to death and holding them tight as they pass into the void. Madness, violence, and murder ran rampant within the halls of Taunton. While many patients housed within the facility were genuinely disturbed, what was far more frightening were the secret activities of the doctors and staff members themselves at Taunton. According to local legend, Taunton was the site of cult activity and devil worship. It was said that patients were routinely sacrificed to Satan and other demons. It was stated that staff members allegedly brought the most helpless of patients down to the basement to be offered to the Dark Lord as sacrificial lambs. Some patients who, after having heard the rumors of what had transpired below the hospital, refused to be brought down to the basement. Because of this, they lost their outdoor privileges. What exactly happened in the basement? We can only speculate. A huge number of staff members report that the basement remains icy cold even in the middle of summer, and there are numerous cold spots that move throughout the entire hospital. Even today, strange markings in blood cover the walls of the basement, where these rumored murder rituals took place. No doubt, possibly hundreds of lost souls are still trapped within these haunted corridors, trying to reach out in the only way they know how. One staff member once decided that he would like to see the truth for himself. As he walked down the length of the stairs, he stopped on the final step, unable to move further. Rooted to the spot, he described what could only be a paranormal experience. As he closed his eyes, he felt every single case of torture and pain that each of the tormented souls trapped within the hospital was put through. He raced back upstairs and resigned from his job that very day. Even now, he has trouble explaining what he saw and went through, and remains traumatized by his experience. It isn't just the hospital that is haunted. The woods that surround it are likewise as ghastly terrifying, as satanic rituals were allegedly conducted there as well. Groaning moans, desperate cries, and anguished calls for help can still be heard at night. Banging noises are a daily occurrence, as are flashing lights and strange cold drafts. Some of the later staff reported seeing a man in white walking around the corridors of the third floor. He flickers in and out of visibility, becoming physical, and then vanishing, coming and going as he wishes. Sometimes he is simply a shadow that crawls across the wall in a slow, terrifying manner, as though looking for something. Other times he becomes a solid figure, striding across the hallway in a rage. The figure is always a male, but no one has ever seen his full face. Residents have reported that he stands in the corner of their rooms and watches them silently. Switch on the lights and he vanishes, his face always hidden in the shadows. Could he be one of the many victims who was tortured and killed at Taunton? Or is he the devil himself, waiting to ensnare unsuspecting victims? Did the doctors, through their heinous acts of brutality and murder, actually manage to raise Satan himself? Is it the victim or perpetrator? Or perhaps even both? We can only speculate. The cemetery is also quite a haunting sight. One resident reports a chilling story. A patient managed to escape the halls of Taunton. He ran out of the facility, but tired quickly, and unable to run any further, he decided to wait the night out in the graveyard. It seemed to be a good idea because no one would think to look for him within the grounds of the hospital itself. As he crouched near a tombstone, he felt the cold, icy grip of a hand holding his shoulder tight enough to bruise it. Thinking that he had been captured, he threw his arms up, turning around to face his captor, only to see that there was utterly nothing and no one behind him. A second later, a soft whisper murmured into his ear, "Leave." It repeated itself again and again and again. Terrified and out of his mind with panic, the man ran back into the hospital where he spent the rest of his days. Were both the ghostly hand and the ghastly voice that of a ghost attempting to warn him to escape the halls of Taunton? Or was it the devil himself trying to frighten the man into staying? One can only wonder. Doors slam, lights flash, and icy chills occur within the rooms of Taunton at any given time. The shadows dance, but not in a happy manner. The silhouettes speak of horror unimaginable, of the hundreds of innocents whose blood was shed in an attempt to bring the devil to life within the walls of Taunton. It is not surprising that this has become one of the most haunted places in the United States of America. Taunton State Hospital, supposedly a sanctuary for the mentally disturbed, where they might find peace of mind and solace of spirit, had become otherwise. The doctors, meant to be their caretakers, turned into their captors, as they used them as sacrificial lambs for slaughter, cutting into them and offering them up as bait for their satanic rituals. Whether it was psychotic criminals like Jane Taunton or the innocent victim whose families shipped them off to Taunton because they could not be bothered with caring for an insane individual, thousands of people were trapped within the halls of Taunton State Hospital, their lives ending in terrifying tragedy. Even today, their souls have not found a way out of the madhouse and remain inside this prison long after their bodies have died and become rotten under the ground.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the 4 stories. I'll continue tomorrow if you guys would like me to do that. And yeah, we'll definitely continue it tomorrow. Don't have nightmares, guys.